this is why I'm not the one giving this talk. Like I said, it's great to see such a good turnout. And again, I'm not sure it's because Dr. Salcedo is the one giving the talk or that the talk's about Dr. Holcroft. I'm going to go with the fact that the talk's about Dr. Holcroft is what drew the attention. No offense to Skeeter.
None taken.
This is a fantastic presentation that Dr. Salcedo is going to be giving. Certainly, this is our thanks to Dr. Holcroft for all of his years of service. It's rather appropriate that the new interns are here. Dr. Holcroft's PI number, you can think of what your PI numbers is. Dr. Holcroft's P9 is 49. So he's been here for a little while, and
You just stole one of my jokes.
It's a fantastic opportunity to have Dr. Salcedo, who is one of the trauma faculty, to give this presentation.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, it's on? Okay, great. So I'm Skeeter. As most everyone knows, Dr. Holcroft will be retiring very shortly. In fact, today is his last day of clinical service, and appropriately, he is rounding in the ICU. He adamantly insisted that no send-off party or celebration be scheduled related to his retirement. So, respecting his wishes, no party is scheduled. Some of us in the trauma division, we did try to convince him otherwise, but he consistently held his stance. Every time we approached him, he employed some other tactic to evade us. He'd say, "I'm busy, I'm working." So we'd wait until he was done working. Say, "I'm with my family, leave me alone." It got to the point where he was running out of papers to write and family to see, and when he'd see us coming, he would just pretend to sleep. But eventually, I wore him down. I told him, "Listen, they're going to make me do grand rounds no matter what, and if it's all the same to you, I'd really like to choose a topic that I care about." Yeah, I laid that one on him, and then I called his wife, and I did the secret Filipino handshake, and he was stuck. Here we are. So a couple of disclosures for you. This is not going to be your typical grand rounds, okay? I'm a big fan of podcasts and programs that involve interviews that tell a story. As I prepared this talk, I really wanted it to be about honoring and having some fun with a colleague and a friend. But I also wanted to try to understand a little bit more about who Dr. Holcroft is beyond the professional persona that we all know and revere. I reached out to a lot of his past trainees, his partners and mentors. I talked to family members and also with Dr. Holcroft at length. That said, when I put the word out, the response was overwhelming. I just want to thank everyone up front right now for taking the time to write me, to talk with me, and to help me do this. I promise you that I read every single word of every message you sent me. I looked at every picture, and I took notes on all of our conversations. But there's simply too much stuff to talk about. I can't get it all crammed in here in the time that I have. So the last disclosure, if you're ever going to do a talk about Dr. Holcroft, you're going to wind up trying to talk like Dr. Holcroft. So just about every class of residents has their person that does a fantastic Holcroft. All right. Unfortunately, you guys are stuck with me today. Okay. I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm actually quite nervous. This morning, when I came in super early, I'm sure everything was just so. Dr. Holcroft saw me, and he was like, "Skeeter, you are taking this very seriously." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I think it's because the last time he saw me wearing a suit was when I interviewed." But be that as it may, every day that I spent trying to figure out how to put this thing together, it became clearer and clearer to me. This is a really big deal. Okay. Here we go. Looking at his nearly 40-year career, the numbers are impressive. So let's take a look at some of those. As Dr. Galante already scooped me, his PI number is 59. Mine is 12,063. He's trained over 300 residents and fellows in his time here. published over 200 articles and book chapters. One of my mentors from fellowship told me, if you're going to be a successful academic surgeon, you need to have your age in publications. Dr. Holcroft accomplished that feat, 75 publications, 20 years ago. He has achieved funding for his research in shock, resuscitation, trauma, and ICU care to the tune of $3 million. So he is legit. Over that course of 40 years, he has drawn 60,000 pressure volume loops. Just to paint a picture for you about what a baller he is as an academic surgeon, American Surgical Association, 1974. This is like a huge meeting. Only professor-level people present at this meeting. Dr. Holcroft is presenting, I think, his first or second paper that he ever published, and he's a fourth-year resident. It's on extravascular lung water following hemorrhagic shock in the baboon. So say that one more time. He's a fourth-year resident presenting at a place where only professors present. Right? So this is what everyone's seeing when he gets up to the podium. This isn't a quick shot session, room 7 of 13 at a regional meeting. There are like 28 papers get accepted at this meeting, 2 of them in basic science. He's one of the 2. He's presenting a paper using a technique that he invented. Okay? So all you fourth years, you have to invent a technique to be a real fourth-year surgical resident. So Franny Moore is one of the most famous academic surgeons at the time. And he is furious with this paper because it basically challenges a lot of the work that he spent his career investigating. He's one of the discussants on the paper, and he lets Dr. Holcroft know exactly how he feels about it. So, like the pro that he is, Dr. Holcroft gets back up to take the podium after all the questions are posed, and he answers all of them. Again, total pro, looks like beyond his years. And then he calls out Dr. Moore on all the various assumptions that he made about the presented work that are just wrong. And he just drops the mic. He walks off the stage, and his chairman, who is just not a hugger, is so proud of him, he gives him a hug as he walks off the stage. So, like, he's the man, basically. All right, so I'm taking a page here from the Bill Pevick book of roast-like presentations. I'm going to start with a high school graduation of Dr. Holcroft. High school graduation picture. It's ridiculous, of course. That's his grade school graduation picture. But here he is with his whole family. He's sitting on his dad, Walt's lap, with his mother, Alice, and sister, Carolyn. When asked about his childhood, he describes it as perfectly happy and warm. He went to MIT, where he was on track to be an electrical engineer. Again, to just highlight this, about 1,000 people get into MIT around this time. 900 will graduate. 600 will be electrical engineers. He was one of 24 students accepted into the honors program at MIT. He went to Case Western Reserve after 2 years in the Peace Corps, where he was in the Philippines and where he met and married his wife, Alicia, shown here. Where's Carl Bayer? Get a look at Carl later. Tell me it doesn't look exactly like Holcroft. All right. I'm going to try not to leave this slide up too long because I'm pretty sure it will give Dr. Holcroft a stroke. Dr. Holcroft had 3 strong women role models growing up, his mother, his aunt, and his nanny, Mrs. Ferguson. All 3 women were voracious readers and intellectually stimulating for him in his childhood. Mrs. Ferguson was African American, and though she never went to college, she knew Latin and Greek and was very much self-educated. He remembers how these 3 women would tease each other for making grammatical errors in their many conversations. Mrs. Ferguson died when Dr. Holcroft was in the Peace Corps, and his family kept in touch with her all those years. Enter Alicia, a former faculty member at the University of the Philippines for English. She served as an English language reviewer for the only agricultural journal in all of Southeast Asia. And when they moved back to the States, she would help Dr. Holcroft write his papers. So now we've got women from his youth laying the foundation, and then Alicia really sparking even more interest in the very precise language we all know and remember. So that's where his love of grammar comes from. Between Mrs. Ferguson's background and experiencing some prejudice firsthand as an interracial marriage, it's clear why Dr. Holcroft values diversity and equality so highly. So if you guys haven't figured it out yet, it's you and I. That's the wrong there. It's as I said, not like I said. Oh, there's the apostrophe. That's a proper noun. Santa Rosa. Since actually is a measure of time, not so much cause and effect. 3,500 seconds. That's not even the right number of seconds. Check your units. Sheeps, mouses, really? There, it's the wrong there again. And no, I'm not an animal. Okay, so I spoke with his son, John, who is also Dr. Holcroft, so that's going to get confusing. As I will not be calling Dr. Holcroft Jim today, we will just go with John. John told me that Dr. Holcroft didn't talk about work at home. He worked a lot for sure, but he never went off golfing or drinking with his buddies. He went to work and he came home to be with his family. He only recalled one occasion where his dad seemed visibly saddened by something at work, and it was when a kid got run over by a train. That was the one time. Every other time, and there were not very many, that he'd ever talked about work, it was always about residents. It was always about how much he enjoyed working with them and teaching them and how important they are to him. I reached out to his children. I was only able to talk to John, but I did want them to tell me something about what they remember of their dad or what they think of their dad. Christina holds a doctorate in mathematics. She's the eldest. As I read this, I couldn't help but notice that these exact sentiments were found throughout many of the thoughts former trainees sent to me. Cynthia, the middle child, is an obstetrician, and her remarks speak to Dr. Holcroft's strong sense of honesty and being forthright. The second piece of advice, I think, is a lesson everyone in this room has had to learn and relearn throughout our careers. John is one of the pediatric intensivists here, and I love his comments for how they open that window to the side of Dr. Holcroft that a lot of us here at his work community rarely see. I've heard people wonder, what is it like to be Holcroft's kid? As they walk away from the PICU having run into Dr. John Holcroft. It turns out that it was perfectly happy and normal, right? You learn how to ride a bike. It's not like this. It's not like, you know, he never asked as a kid, like, well, what if a platypus was riding your bike? It was just being home with Dad. I asked John, his kids don't do impressions of him when he's not around. And John couldn't think of anything that he says all the time or anything even particularly distinctive about his voice. And I remember being surprised at that when he said that. I was like, really? But then I thought of my own dad, and I realized that, yeah, of course this is perfectly normal. This is what you'd expect from just a normal, wonderful relationship between kids and their fathers. But it's funny because this disconnect between Dr. Holcroft and how he was imagined at home was so marked that John told me he recalled one of his sisters being asked, "Do you guys have electricity?" Apparently, at some point, residents used to think that the Holcrofts lived in a remote cabin somewhere and they made their own clothes. There's really not much to say about these pictures. As a relatively new father myself and a son my entire life, I would only say that there's not much more one can ask for than to be able to have these pictures taken and to remember every moment that happens between them, before and after them. All right. This is a letter from Dr. Holcroft's dad that he wrote to MIT about him. It's just a part of it. I feel like the part that I highlighted is like such a Holcroft thing to say. Right? It's like, I love my son. He's my favorite thing. I like him, and he's quite easy to live with. You know, Dr. Holcroft describes his relationship with his dad as more distant in comparison to his relationship to his mother. But he never doubted that his dad cared for him, and he was always there for him. It's interesting to see similar sentiments about thoughtfulness and attentiveness echoed in comments from Dr. Holcroft's kids about him. This is the next part of the letter, and I highlighted this part here because I think it captures so much about what we respect about Dr. Holcroft. He'll be the first to tell you that he made some choices that affected the trajectory of his career. And the thing about those choices is that they were always firmly seated in a commitment to his family, to the well-being of his residents, and to the truth. More importantly, he has never regretted making any of them, and he considers his life a very happy one. One thing he unequivocally learned from his father was to stand by your work and to do the right thing. Walt Holcroft was an engineer specializing in metallurgy. His father's commitment to the ideals of quality and integrity was so steadfast that his company, Holcroft and Company, still bears the same name decades after his father retired and sold it off, because that name had become synonymous with those ideals in that business. Dr. Holcroft instills the same ideals with his residents that he teaches. Not really much of a thing now for the interns and the residents, but with the EMR, but back when charts were all handwritten, he would chide residents for signing notes illegibly. To this day, years later, his residents cannot sign their name without clearly printing it right next to their signature, even when it's on the page. All right, so there are some stories about Dr. Holcroft that have passed into lore and legend. And I had, like I said, I had the opportunity to sit down with them at length and find out if they were true. So I pulled some headlines back from the time, and I found that this time, so when Dr. Holcroft was a resident, right? Now, when you bring this up to him, the first thing he says is, "I was with Don Trunke." So he and Don, they're working on baboons for that paper that I showed you earlier, and one of them goes down while they're working. And apparently the baboons are very valuable. You need to get your work done. But apparently, like Dr. Trunke was, we got to save this animal. And Dr. Holcroft was like, well, it's led a full life. But Trunke being a senior, they started doing mouth to mouth, and they did a full code. But apparently they were all females. The animal's condition was too dire, so she didn't make it. The other one, Jimmy from the river. So this is a real thing. As you all know, or maybe you don't, Dr. Holcroft's an avid kayaker. He started in the early 90s and became a real fixture in the whitewater community. And people knew that because when he used to go kayaking, he used to give the interns his pager, which drove Abramson crazy. But one of the things that happened that sort of alerted everyone to his hobby was he was out one day and this OR nurse was like out rafting, and she got stranded on this island in the middle of the river, and she's clutching on for dear life, and Dr. Holcroft and his kayaking buddy Rick Sims, they see her and they go to her aid. Now he tells me when you're kayaking, you've got all this gear on, like helmet, you look like a gladiator, and it's not easy to recognize people. So I just want you to imagine being this OR nurse. You're clutching on for your life on this rock, and then this like robotic-looking sort of kayak approaches you and it says, "Just go ahead and let go of the rock. Grab onto the ropes on my kayak." So that's what she does, and Holcroft paddles her to safety. And when she's sort of coming around and getting her wits about her, she kind of says, "That I recognize your voice." And that's when she figures out it's Dr. Holcroft, and she starts telling people all over the OR. One thing leads to another, and now it's Jimmy from the river, the whitewater master, is rounding in the ICU. Residents described him as the Iceman, invincibly cool. They never saw him nervous, cool as a cucumber, supernaturally calm under even the most dire circumstances in the OR. Once he told a resident during a tough case, "This isn't scary. Grade 5 rapids are scary. That's when your life is at stake. But this isn't scary." He would hand aortic clamps to medical students and say, "You are the most important person in this case, because if that clamp comes off, well then, the patient will die." And he would say it like he was updating that student on like a score of a baseball game. When surgeons finish up residency, they often talk about the voices in their head. These are the voices that keep us out of trouble and remind us to look one last time or when not to operate. Dr. Holcroft is unequivocally one of those voices in our heads. Read this next slide and you'll see what I mean. That is my gift to you today, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Holcroft singing Rapper's Delight. He is unanimously regarded as one of the finest teachers UC Davis surgical residents ever had, precisely because of how in your head he gets when he's teaching. He has won multiple teaching awards from residents and medical students, including the John C. Tupper Prize for Teaching, which he won twice, prompting a rule change that did not permit repeat winners. So it's a little bit of a digression to voices in your head. The amygdala is our emotional brain. Now, it's set up so that a given set of stimuli elicits a certain immediate response or action, usually aimed at self-preservation. So for example, I'm walking along and I see a coiled hose out of the corner of my eye, but it's sort of in the shadows. Without any thought, I immediately leap into the air, run in the opposite direction, and scream like a little child, because that's my reaction. Now, because it's a hose, I look ridiculous. But if it were a snake, my immediate flight could have saved my life. As I'm reading all the things that are coming back from the residents, a similar set of responses were described when rounding with Dr. Holcroft. They range from excitable anticipation to straight up stress. But I want to point out that it was always out of respect and not wanting to disappoint, not fear. I like this story about how Dr. Holcroft helped a resident clear her mind when being bombarded by her amygdala. And I quote, "When I was with my dad in the ICU, the voice in my head was Holcroft. I literally could not get his voice out of my head. For 2 weeks, while my dad was intubated and sedated, as I would constantly stare at his ventilator settings and his pressure volume loops, listening to the cardiac monitor beating to his heartbeat, I could hear how Holcroft would manage this patient, my dad. Somehow it was strangely comforting to have that voice in my head, to know that I had learned something during all that time in the ICU, that I had someone there with me who understood what was going on. It was like Dr. Holcroft and I were discussing my dad's critical care, and it took me away from the motion of it all for a minute. In a weird way, Dr. Holcroft helped me get through my dad's sickness, and for that I am forever grateful." I also want to point out that Katie's dad looks exactly like Santa Claus, which is fantastic. So I made a word cloud using all the responses from every former trainee that wrote back to me to identify what were the most commonly recurring themes in their stories, sentiments, and fond memories. For those who don't know, the size of the word is proportional to the number of times the word appears. So the larger the word, the more commonly it's mentioned in the inner text. This is what I thought the word cloud would look like. I swear to you, as I read each response, some animal, usually a wombat or a seal, would be mentioned right next to a comment about pressure volume loops. But it turns out the actual word cloud looked like this. This will come as no surprise to anyone who has ever worked with Dr. Holcroft. If there are two things that he values more and what it means to be a surgeon, I don't know what they might be. So a lot of residents remember that their first solo operations were done with, or rather without, Dr. Holcroft. Residents speak of his faith in them to do the right thing and recognize that his confidence in them made them confident in themselves. One such solo case was when our own Dr. Ho Fan was a junior resident doing an above-the-knee amputation with his chief. The guys discussed the plan with Dr. Holcroft, who reminded them that the AKA should be done as high as possible to give the wound the best chance of healing. So off they go, do their AKA, and they get to the part where they have to use the power saw to cut through the femur. So here's a picture from the OR on that actual day in that actual case. And I quote, "We persisted to do this for a while, and every time we used the saw, sparks were everywhere." The guys called Dr. Holcroft in to check things out, who asked them what the x-ray looked like. They both looked at it, but just didn't notice the hip prosthetic extending down that low. Never losing his cool, he offered them some advice on what to do and eventually found some metal cutters to complete the job. On another occasion, one of the chief residents is opening an abdomen with a junior resident for a guy who got shot. Dr. Holcroft walks in at some point and sits in the corner with a book. Things get under control and the chief looks up to see what he's doing. Now I'm quoting here. He's reading a college physics textbook for fun. I asked what he was doing, and he replied that things had changed a lot since he was in college, and he wanted to see what was new. So that's an example of the growth mindset. And the growth mindset is that the person's ability and intelligence are not fixed, but rather can be developed with effort and motivation. It's a fundamental recognition that success does not come without multiple failures. More so that challenges and failures are the key to learning. The idea has been popularized by psychologists over the last decade or so, but here's Dr. Holcroft in 1962, his junior year at MIT, basically telling his parents about it. Another more timely example of this idea, every time Dr. Holcroft wants to emphasize a point he's making about clinical care, he uses a personal example of a mistake that he made in his career. When asked about his most memorable patient at his last lecture, he immediately responded with the first one that he felt he killed as a medical student. This is why he's so committed to an open and honest M&M, because that's where we learn. Taking a step further, every great save that he talks about, he will always attribute to the team or even to someone else. But every mistake that the team makes, he will take full responsibility. All right. So 5 years ago, Dr. Holcroft had a 70th birthday party that was a total surprise. And I asked him, how was it? What do you remember? Tell me about it. So he said, I don't remember. There was Dogfish Head, he said. He had about 6 of those. So I just wanted to jog your memory a little bit, Dr. Holcroft. Dr. Blaisdell was there. Dogfish Head was there. There's Dogfish Head number 2. Dogfish Head number 3. Dogfish Head number 4. Dogfish Head number 5. Hey-o, Dogfish Head number 6. So Ann Kin sent me this story of how she had just told Dr. Holcroft how much everyone respects him at his party, and he told her how proud he was of what she was doing and had done, having just returned from a surgical trip to West Africa. Dr. Kim sent me these pictures that she captioned perfectly herself, so I didn't have to really do anything. I'll just let you just go on this journey together with me. So after reading her story, what she wrote me, I'm pretty sure this is the thing she is most proud of about her time at UC Davis. So gratitude from the residents. These are just a sample of the many different ways people shared their thanks to Dr. Holcroft with me. I found it interesting and humbling that people would think to thank me also. It occurred to me as I corresponded with more and more people how internalized Dr. Holcroft's lessons were for everyone, to varying degrees, in the sense that they appreciated being prompted to remember all the good times and lessons learned over the years. So Dr. Holcroft likes beer, and Pliny the Elder is consistently ranked one of the best beers in the world. But part of its allure is that it's very difficult to get. You can only buy a case at the brewery in Santa Rosa. You never know when it's going to show up at one of the limited places in the area. And even if they do have it, you're only allowed to buy 2 bottles. The other thing is it has to be drank fresh. You have to drink it within 2 weeks of the bottling day and it has to be kept cold. So it's like complicated to get it. but we wanted to get it for him because we knew he'd appreciate, that beer. So I can put the bat signal out, and I found Michael Lasker, who lives in Santa Rosa. Right? So it's complicated because I had to make sure we had it in time for this, but I couldn't get it too early because then he can't drink it. So I called Michael and I'm like, Michael, I need your help. Can we get Dr. Holcroft a case of Pliny the Elder? And he's like, oh, Dr. Salcedo, no problem. Say no more. And he's such a great guy. He's like, I'm going to go, and he buys a case, and he's all excited about, and we'll figure out how to get it to Sacramento. Don't worry about it. And then now I'm trying to figure out how to get it here, right? So I have to drive there, but I've got a 2-week-old child. I'm pretty sure my wife will kill me if I do that. And I asked Dr. Schatz, who's a pilot, like, hey, you want to fly to Santa Rosa? And he's like, sure, yeah. How much do you weigh? And I was like, yeah, never mind. We'll do it some other time. It's cool. I'm pretty sure we'd only be able to bring a couple bottles back, and that's not going to work. So Michael and I, we arranged to meet in Fairfield, California, sort of equidistant Santa Rosa and Sacramento. We met, at a Target parking lot, and I was looking for the shoes hanging from the wires, and we pulled off the exchange, and he gives me the case of beer, and then he also gives me, and I'll show it to you later. It's actually back there, I think. He also gives me a growler of 2 liters of beer, and I'm like, Michael, we're trying to honor him, not kill him. But he insists that Dr. Holcroft have this growler, so there's a growler of Pliny the Elder back there for you, in case you haven't finished that case yet. But I tried to ask Michael how much it cost so I could pay him, and he wouldn't have it. What he said was, I owe him so much for everything he's done for me that you can consider this a small beginning of trying to repay everything over the years. So, he's going to retire. What are we going to do? The whole Crexit is upon us. The votes have been tallied, and it was close. Alicia won. She's retiring. So some of the ideas for a second career. He's going to be a pilot, maybe. Here he is trying that out, flying in Tanzania. Here he is trying to figure out how to get me and a case of beer on a plane back from Santa Rosa. He also looked into going back to his hockey days. He was a pretty great player back at MIT. He's very proud to tell you that their record was the best record at MIT for 50 years. There he is up close. He found a club league in the area that had some old friends that he recognized. The problem is he's pretty sure the refs were in the family, and he wonders if this injury might be retribution for that whole baboon incident as a resident. The other idea was maybe to be a model. Here he is, looking model-like, showing off his shoes. Apparently, old habits die hard. There's a face shot for GQ, and I remember talking to Dr. Holcroft's wife, Alicia, and I said, what sorts of things did you find interesting about him when you first met him? And, I felt like I was interviewing her for and I was expecting all this list of stuff, and she kind of said, well, that's a difficult thing to answer. But I mean, he was not bad looking. Which, I can't disagree. I mean, he's a stunning looking guy right there. Here he is practicing the blue steel look. And here he is practicing that look. Now, I'm not sure what look this is, except to say that Alicia has always supported his career efforts. So what does his wife say? There's always the last word. I think the way we'll always remember him is as a great teacher, great surgeon, fantastic colleague, and a good friend. With that, I'd like to bring Dr. Holcroft up so that we can give you guys the opportunity to ask him your questions after I ask him some questions.
This is what I've been worried about. I'm back there sweating. I don't need it. You don't need it? Oh, no, my face.
All right, so like I said, I love those programs that have interviews and try to tell a story, and one of them is Inside the Actor Studio, where James Lipton asked the Pivot questionnaire. I don't know if you're probably familiar with this. It's an adaptation of the Proust questionnaire, which is a questionnaire that's designed to help you learn about someone's personality. James Lipton asks these same questions to every guest that he has on the TV show, and I thought it'd be fun to ask those questions to Dr. Holcroft this morning.
And to be fair, he did show me the questions before.
Yes, I did. I didn't want to put him that much on the spot. Because I was pretty sure he hasn't seen Inside the Actor Studio. So, what is your favorite word?
Favorite word? I'm drawing a blank. I suppose like soul or something like
Something like what?
that. Oh, something like, let's do it, I guess.
Let's do it. All right. What is your least favorite word?
Can't be done.
Can't be done. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Music.
Music. And what turns you off?
Illogical, resentful, pessimism, not concerned about the other guy.
What is your favorite curse word?
I don't curse.
All right. What sound or noise do you love?
Yeah, I thought about that one. Yeah, speak così fan tutte. Yeah. And that's an interesting one. You are going to get the John Elliott Gardner version. That's critical. So, and because it has the right ending. So I could find it start with Elizabeth Ponte or Hopkins, but that's as good as it gets.
What sound or noise do you find annoying?
When I think about Russian.
That's not actually a sound. This is what you thought about.
We have this wonderful nurse in the ICU who's very politically oriented toward Rush Limbaugh, and he used to play it. Play it on the radio. Now the patients are all anesthetized. I'd walk by that room, and he's a wonderful nurse. I just have to move on.
All right. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Oh yeah, fireman, no question.
Fire.
I actually still get goosebumps, literally, at age 65 when I hear a fire truck.
What profession would you not like to do?
Oh yeah, now I never worked for a pharmaceutical company. It was different a few years ago. It was when the companies were owned by families. That was a different era. I'm told that the company that first made streptomycin did not get a patent. That was the drug for tuberculosis. Changed.
All right. Now, we all know you're an atheist,
Yeah.
but if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You know, when the angels play for God, either they play Bach, when they play for themselves, they play Mozart. I'd like him to say, hey, would you like to hear some Mozart?
Thank you, Dr. Holcroft. I gave you your students, your residents, your colleagues. None of you want to ask me any questions, so for the last few minutes, I think you guys can talk to Dr. Holcroft.